My daughter weaponized custody court against me for years, so I let her win everything she wished for. The thing about my daughter Saskia is that she was 17 when she filed her first formal complaint against me in family court. The complaint wasn't hers, in any meaningful sense. The complaint was written by her father's attorney, signed by her, and weaponized by her father Reginald, who had been using our daughter as a court instrument since she was 11. The first complaint was about my controlling behavior, because I required Saskia to have her phone off at the dinner table. The second was about my emotional unavailability, because I wouldn't let her quit her chemistry class. The third was about my financial restriction, because I wouldn't buy her a car at 16. By the time Saskia was 19, there were 11 complaints. Every one of them ended with a small concession for me. That concession was a legal mechanism by which my custody share, my financial contribution, and my decision-making rights were being slowly transferred to Reginald, who wasn't doing any of this for love of his daughter, who was doing this because every concession he extracted from me, on paper, became a thing he could leverage in our ongoing financial settlement. Our divorce, when I had left him 6 years earlier, hadn't been finalized. Our state's continuance laws allowed an open settlement to remain open as long as ongoing custody or financial issues remained active. Reginald used our daughter as the ongoing issue. The dumber she thinks I am, the more rope she'll hand me. But Saskia wasn't she in this story. Saskia was my daughter, who was being used, who didn't know the full shape of what her father was doing with her signatures. What I did, on the day Saskia turned 19, wasn't fight the 12th complaint. My attorney, a calm woman named Magdalena, sat across from me at her conference table, telling me gently that there was a strategic option I hadn't been considering, that I could simply stop contesting, that I could agree to everything, that I could let Saskia win every claim her father had her file, that doing so would close the open settlement, that closing the open settlement would, paradoxically, end Reginald's ability to leverage future complaints, that it would mean financial losses for me in the short term, that it would mean watching my daughter believe, for some period of time, that she had won against me, that she was 19, and that Reginald could no longer use minor child custody as the vehicle, but had been retooling to use adult child financial dependency as the next vehicle, that the next 10 years of my daughter's life were going to be his instrument unless I broke a loop. I thought about it for 2 weeks, then I agreed. I didn't tell Saskia. I simply stopped contesting every claim. The 12th complaint was ruled in Saskia's favor without contest. The financial settlement was finalized at terms heavily favorable to Reginald. My house wasn't mine anymore. A portion of my retirement wasn't mine anymore. Saskia, on paper, had won. The open settlement closed. Reginald celebrated publicly. Saskia celebrated too, for about 6 weeks. Then a thing started happening that Reginald hadn't planned for. Saskia found out, through a routine adult administrative task, that her father had used her signatures, since she was 11, in ways she didn't know about. When Saskia applied for her first adult credit card at 19, she was declined. When she called the credit bureau, she was told her credit profile was rich for her age, that she had 7 open lines, that 2 of them were 30 days late, that 1 of them was in collections. All of them had been opened, between the ages of 11 and 17, under her name, with her father as a co-signer or authorized user. Reginald had used our daughter's identity, since she was 11, as a parallel financial vehicle for his own. The credit card debts, the small loans, the line he'd opened to finance the legal fees of all those complaints, all of it in her name. Saskia, when she found this out, couldn't breathe. Saskia called me, the first phone call I'd received from my daughter in 14 months. The call wasn't about apologies. The call was her, 20-year-old voice cracking, asking me if I knew. I told her gently that I had suspected for years, that I hadn't been able to prove it, that I had chosen, 2 years ago, to stop fighting the surface battle so that the deeper thing could come to light without me being the messenger she would never have believed, that I was so sorry it had cost her this much, that I was here. Saskia sobbed on the phone for 40 minutes. I sat on my couch and didn't say anything. The next morning, my daughter showed up at my apartment, with a folder, of the credit reports, the account histories, the timeline, asking me, very small, "Mom, what do I do?" I called Magdalena. Magdalena was ready. Magdalena had been ready for 2 years. The thing Magdalena and I knew, that Reginald didn't know, was that the moment my daughter herself made the discovery and chose, of her own free adult volition to file, the case would no longer be a custody case. It would be a financial identity theft case. That financial identity theft of a minor by a parent was a felony in our state. That Saskia, as the victim, would be the complainant, not me. That I had spent 2 years quietly losing battles I needed to lose so that this day could happen on Saskia's terms. Saskia filed. Reginald was investigated within a month, charged within 4 months. But here's the thing. While the prosecutor was processing Reginald's case, the investigators were working the financial paper trail backwards. The loans Reginald had opened in Saskia's name hadn't been spent only on legal fees. The investigators found regular wire transfers, from the accounts in our daughter's name, going to a third party, every month, for 6 years. The third party wasn't an attorney. The third party was a name, on a residential apartment lease, 2 states away. The apartment was being leased by a woman who, when investigators looked into her, was a half-sister of Reginald's that I didn't know existed, who had been confined to that apartment, with full-time care, for 30 years, since an incident in their family home when he and she were teenagers. An incident, the investigators told me, that hadn't been an accident. The day Magdalena put this plan in front of me, I was sitting in her office and I could feel the weight of it before she even finished talking. She had her hands folded and she looked at me the way she always did. Calm, direct, no sugar on it. "If you stop contesting," she said, "the settlement closes. He loses his vehicle, but you lose your house, a portion of your retirement, and for a while, you lose your daughter's respect." I just sat there for a second. I asked her what happens if I keep fighting. Magdalena didn't pause. "He files complaint 13, she said, then 14. Then he pivots to adult dependency claims. This goes on for another decade. Another decade. Saskia would be almost 30 before it ended." I sat with that picture in my head and I felt sick. But here's the thing I haven't told you yet. I had already suspected what Reginald was doing with Saskia's identity for over a year by that point. There were small signs. One time, Saskia had mentioned on the phone that her dad handled a bank account for her. She said it like it was normal. I didn't push it because I knew if I pushed, she would shut down and report back to Reginald. Then there was a piece of mail. I had been at Reginald's house picking up some of Saskia's things, and I saw an envelope on the counter with Saskia's name on it. It was from a financial company. Saskia was right there and she picked it up and looked confused. She said, "I don't know what this is." Reginald walked over and said, "Oh, that's nothing, I'll handle it," and took it from her. She just shrugged and moved on, but I didn't. I had mentioned both of these things to Magdalena, and Magdalena, without telling me exactly what she was doing, had quietly started building a file. But here was the problem. We had no proof that Saskia didn't know about the accounts. If I raised it in court, Reginald would immediately coach Saskia to say she knew about the accounts and consented to them. So we sat on it. Magdalena kept her file. I kept my mouth shut. When she put this plan in front of me, I understood that this was also about giving the deeper thing room to surface on its own, without me touching it. Because if Saskia found it herself, then Reginald couldn't blame me. So I made the decision. Magdalena slid the documents across the table and I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I signed every page. mortgage. I agreed to give up my house. I agreed to give up a portion of my retirement. When I finished signing, I looked at Magdalena. I asked her, how long do you think it will take? She knew what I meant. Magdalena looked at me for a long time. Then she said, for her to find out on her own, could be months, could be years, could be never. I sat with that word, never. I could lose everything and get nothing back. I signed anyway. I packed my things from my house on a Saturday. I had boxes from the grocery store because I didn't want to spend money on real moving boxes. I wrapped my dishes in newspaper. I put my books in garbage bags. I moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from where I used to live. One bedroom, a window that looked out at a parking lot. I did not cry. There is a specific feeling that comes with choosing to lose on purpose. It is the feeling of holding your breath underwater and trusting that you timed it right. And also knowing that maybe you timed it wrong. Maybe you drown. Reginald celebrated. I heard through a mutual contact that he told people I finally gave up. Those were his exact words. Saskia did not call, not once. I went to work every morning, came home every evening, and waited. Magdalena checked in once a week. Nothing yet, I told her, every single time. 6 weeks of nothing yet. 6 weeks of going to bed wondering if I had just given away my house and my retirement for absolutely no reason. Then Saskia applied for her first credit card. I didn't know it was happening in real time. I was sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday evening, eating leftovers out of a container. I had no idea that across town my daughter was on the phone with the credit bureau learning that her entire financial identity had been hollowed out by her own father. I found out the same way she wanted me to find out. She called me. My phone buzzed and I looked over and saw her name on the screen. I had not seen that name on my phone in 14 months. I picked up. I didn't let it ring twice. Her voice was cracking before she even got a full sentence out. She said, Mom, did you know Dad opened credit cards in my name? And right there, I had to make a choice. If I told her about Magdalena's 2-year file right now, on this phone call, with her voice breaking, she would feel like a chess piece all over again. She would feel like her mother had been playing a long game with her life just like her father had. So I told her I had suspected but could not prove it. That was true. I told her I hadn't been able to do anything about it because I had no proof, and no way to raise it without Reginald twisting it against me. I did not tell her about Magdalena's file. I did not tell her about the strategy. Instead, I said, I'm so sorry. Tell me everything they told you. And she did. She read me the credit report like she was reading a list of injuries. 7 open lines of credit, all in her name. Every single one of them had been opened between the time she was 11 and the time she was 17. Every single one of them had Reginald listed as either the cosigner or the authorized user. She read me account numbers. One of the accounts had been used to pay legal fees. His legal fees. The fees for the attorney who wrote the complaints that Saskia signed. He had used her name to pay for the weapon he built out of her. She kept reading and her voice kept getting smaller. And when she finished reading, she stopped talking. And then she started crying. The kind of crying where the ground under someone's feet has just disappeared. She sobbed on the phone for 40 minutes. I sat on my couch and I did not say a single word. Every part of me wanted to talk. Every part of me wanted to say, I know baby, I know, I've known for years and I have a plan. But I didn't. Because Saskia did not need me to explain right now. She needed to feel what she was feeling. She had spent years being told what to think by Reginald. I was not going to be another person telling her what to think. So I sat there and I listened. After 40 minutes, Saskia spoke again. Her voice was raw and she said, he used me. This whole time, he used me. I closed my eyes when she said it. She didn't need me to confirm it. She already knew. The next morning, I heard a knock on my apartment door at 7:15. I opened it and Saskia was standing there. She was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie and her hair was pulled back. She looked small. She had been up all night. She had credit reports printed out, account histories, a timeline she had built herself, matching dates of account openings to dates of court filings, showing how every new complaint her father had her file lined up with a new financial account opened in her name. She had done all of this herself, in one night. She sat down at my kitchen table and she put the folder down and she looked up at me and she said, Mom, what do I do? I sat down across from her. I put my hand on the folder, and then I picked up my phone and I called Magdalena. Magdalena picked up on the first ring. It was 7:30 in the morning and she picked up on the first ring, like she had been sleeping with the phone next to her pillow. I said 2 words. She found it. There was a pause on the other end. One breath. Then Magdalena said, I'm ready. Bring her in today. We drove to Magdalena's office together. Saskia stared out the window and didn't say anything for the whole drive. Same table where I had signed those documents over a year ago. Same chairs. But this time, when Saskia sat down across from Magdalena, I sat down next to my daughter, not across from her, next to her. For years, every table in every legal proceeding had been set up the same way. Saskia on one side, me on the other. My daughter facing me like an opponent. But now my daughter was sitting next to me. The girl who had filed 11 complaints against her mother was about to file the complaint that would end her father. The child who had been the weapon was about to become the witness. Magdalena looked at Saskia and said, Saskia, what your father did qualifies as financial identity theft of a minor. In our state, that is a felony. Saskia blinked. Then she said, but he's my dad. Can they really charge him? Magdalena didn't hesitate. She said, he opened accounts in a child's name without her knowledge or consent and used them for his personal benefit. The law doesn't care that he's your father. The room got very quiet. And then very quietly, Saskia said, he told me the complaints were my idea. He told me you were the problem. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the table. And I did not respond because she wasn't asking me to respond. Magdalena explained the next steps. When she finished, Saskia didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just picked up her folder and said she needed to think. What followed was 3 of the longest days of my life. Saskia stayed at my apartment. She slept on my couch, or tried to sleep. She didn't eat much. She asked me questions. A lot of questions. She asked about the marriage, about why I left, about what Reginald was like before the divorce. She asked, did you really try to take me away from Dad when I was 12? I told her no. I told her what actually happened. I gave her the facts. I did not add my feelings to them. On the second night, she was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up to her chest and she said, why didn't you just tell me? I looked at her and I said, would you have believed me? She opened her mouth like she was going to answer. Then she closed it. She looked away. She didn't answer. Because we both knew. If I had told her a year ago, she would have gone straight to her father and repeated every word I said. On the morning of the 3rd day, Saskia came out of the bathroom dressed in real clothes for the first time. She had washed her hair. She was holding her folder. She looked at me and she said, I want to file. I nodded. We got in the car and I drove her to the office. Saskia's hands were shaking in her lap the whole way. When we got there, she read through every page and she signed her name at the bottom. Her hand shook when she signed, but she signed. And just like that, the whole thing shifted. Saskia was the complainant, not me. This was exactly what Magdalena had planned, because if this complaint came from me, Reginald would have spun it into another custody battle. He would have called it revenge. But this complaint came from his daughter. He could not spin that. Reginald was investigated within a month. He hired an attorney. He called Saskia. She did not pick up. He called again. She did not pick up. He called a 3rd time and she turned her phone off and put it in a drawer and left it there for 2 days. Then he called me. I picked up and I said hello and I waited. And Reginald, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound calm but wasn't, said, you put her up to this. I let a beat pass. Then I said, she applied for a credit card, Reginald. That's all that happened. He was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then he hung up. That was the last time Reginald and I spoke directly. The charges came within 4 months. Identity theft, wire fraud, and a charge specific to our state for exploitation of a financially dependent family member. His attorney tried to negotiate. cooperate. They pushed hard for a plea deal, but the prosecutor declined the deal. It went to trial. It did not take long. I sat in that courtroom next to Saskia. We sat behind the prosecutor's table, on the side I had never been on before, and across the room, at the defense table, sat Reginald. I looked at him, this man who had spent years making me feel small in courtrooms, who had told everyone who would listen that I finally gave up. And for the first time in all the years I had known him, Reginald looked small. He looked like a man who had run out of people to hide behind. The verdict came back guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Reginald to 4 years. He ordered full restitution to Saskia for every dollar plus damages. And then the judge did something I was not expecting. He looked at the record of the custody settlement and he said that the settlement had been obtained through a pattern of manipulation and fraud. He ordered Reginald to return a portion of those assets as compensation. My house was coming back to me. My retirement was being made whole. I sat there in that courtroom and I did not react. I just breathed. When it was over, we walked outside. It was a bright day, the kind of bright that makes you squint. Saskia turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it." I looked at this girl who had been handed papers to sign when she was 11 years old, and I said, "You were 11 when it started. You don't owe me an apology." She moved back in with me while she worked on rebuilding her credit. It took about a year. During that year, we relearned each other. Slowly, we cooked together. She would stand next to me at the counter chopping things and ask me questions about stuff she had missed. She asked about my apartment, the small one, the one with the window that faced the parking lot. She got quiet when I described it. There were small moments during that year that I held on to so tight. Her laughing at something on the TV and looking over at me to see if I was laughing too. Her leaving a cup of coffee on my nightstand in the morning before I woke up. But here's the part I need to tell you, the part that changed everything again. While the prosecutor was working Reginald's case, the investigators kept following the money. They traced the loans he had opened in Saskia's name backwards. They found wire transfers, regular ones. Every month for 6 years, money went out of accounts in my daughter's name to a third party, not an attorney. A name on a residential apartment lease, 2 states away. The name was Elena Appleby. When the investigators looked into her, they found out she was Reginald's half-sister. A half-sister I never knew existed. Not once in our entire marriage did he mention her. Elena had been living in that apartment, with full-time care, for 30 years, since something happened in their family home when Reginald and Elena were teenagers. The investigator sat across from me and Saskia when he told us this part. He said the incident had not been an accident. He didn't go into details. He didn't have to. I looked at Saskia. Saskia looked at me, and neither of us said anything for a very long time. So here's what I got back. My house, my retirement, my daughter. Saskia asked me once quietly while we were doing dishes, "Do you think we should visit her?" I looked at my daughter and I said, "When you're ready. We haven't gone yet, but the address is on the refrigerator, written on a piece of paper held up by a magnet." Last Thursday I came home from work, and Saskia was standing at the refrigerator with the paper in her hand. She wasn't reading it. She was holding it the way you hold something when you've already memorized it. There was a second piece of paper on the counter next to her, a printed email. She handed it to me without looking up. The email was from Elena's care coordinator at the apartment 2 states away. It said Elena had been asking for someone specific for 30 years. Not Reginald, not their mother, not anyone in their family that I had ever heard of. The name Elena had been asking for, in the same 2 words, every Tuesday afternoon for 3 decades, was the name Saskia had been given at birth.